Everyone, we're going to get started in just a few minutes, so go ahead and find a spot, cozy up, and we'll get rolling in a few. So people are in line. We should probably wait, huh? Do you want to sit? Do you want to stand here, Chris? Okay. Folks, I'm going to ask that if you are in line for a book, that you hold off on the purchase until afterwards. We are going to resume sales of the book after our conversation, so in order to keep up with our timetable, it'd be awesome if we could all just sit down, and then we'll have our time of conversation, and then we'll pick up with the book sales afterwards. The books are going to be twice as much after the sale, though. Just kidding! I'm kidding. That's not true. Same price. Yes? 7 books left. All right, so I guess whoever was behind David, sorry about that. Okay, so books are sold out. For some reason, the amount of books we wanted delivered weren't delivered. So I'm sorry about that, and we will talk about how to make that up to you. So we'll get started in about 3 minutes. All right, you got it? Kelly, if you could take that phone to Matthew, would be helpful. Thank you. Everybody, welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to St. Paul's. Welcome to this book launch, which feels like a lot of things coming together. I tell you, when I was interviewing for this position, it was in 2018/19, and HRI was alive and well, doing its thing, and a woman named Miriam came and did the visitation in Bloomington, Indiana, where I was currently serving as the rector, and we talked about HRI. And we talked about this book, and we talked about the History Project, and we talked about all of the things that St. Paul's was doing. And I feel like this is yet another culmination of that conversation. So I'm happy to be here tonight. I'm happy that you're all here. Before we bring Chris up to do the introductory remarks, I would love it if you at your tables, if you don't know somebody, turn and introduce yourselves to the people at your table, okay? All right, folks. Well, without further ado, we're going to start our night off. I told Chris that I wanted Chris to shine tonight, and he said, well, I want us all to shine. And indeed, I think that we are. So, Chris, come on up. Congratulations. We're happy for you.
Thank you. I'm always the guy that's going to say, well, actually. So this isn't a culmination, this is just the beginning. So thank you all for the opportunity. And I do have some words, maybe about 15 minutes, and included in that is a bit of a reading from the new material in the book that you haven't had yet. Because this is a bit of an odd moment on a couple of levels, at least for me. Debuting a book in front of the people about whom the book is about really seems weird, especially when you're a historian who's used to writing about people that are long dead, and especially since this is not necessarily a celebratory work. I can't tell you how mortified I'm ready to be. So, the second is that we're debuting this book in a room full of people that have basically already read it. But this one's a little bit different. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to explore this book yet, and I hope you do, and for those of you who have read it, I want to tell you a little bit about what it's about, and also a little about what's a bit different from the earlier edition. So this edition is based on the report of St. Paul's History and Reconciliation Initiative that began in 2015 when this church kicked off a remarkable institutional self-study of its racial history to better understand what impacts that history has on our society now and has on our church now, whether it does or doesn't, and if so, what ways. And HRI was more than just the historical research, but since we are here talking about the book tonight, I'm going to talk about the book and the research and what's in it. So the book asks two questions. The first is, how did the people of St. Paul's understand, from a theological perspective, their obligations and responsibilities regarding race over time, from 1844 until about 2020. And the second thing is that how did St. Paul's embrace of a Confederate identity shape it and the community, Richmond, in which we live? And this book traces these answers to these questions through critical moments in 5 different generations of this church. And this is kind of how the chapters are broken down. So it's kind of one generation per chapter. So chapter 1 covers the generation that practiced slavery and pro-slavery Christianity before the Civil War. Chapter 2 would be the generation that adapted itself to new social realities, emancipation, basically, by embracing the lost cause, not just through the installation of the memorial windows and other plaques that you'll see in the sanctuary, but through literature and history and storytelling and programs within this church's life at the time. Chapter 3 covers the social gospel generation of the 1910s through 1930s and looked at the people who motivated themselves to address racial inequities in Richmond because of, and yes, because of the lost cause storytelling, what it told them about their own responsibilities to black people in Richmond, but also doing it with with the methods of the social gospel and the new social movement, the progressive movement of the early 20th century. It's just that chapter is a surprising chapter, but I don't want to get carried away and try to make it sound like I'm letting these folks off the hook. So, the post-World War II generation is chapter 4 that retreated from public activism and in their complacency resisted in ways the civil rights movement. And then the final chapter is that remarkable generation after 1969 that slowly but surely shed their Confederate identity while adopting one based on an intentionally progressive approach to racial theology and politics. And many of you in this room now are part of that generation. In all this, you'll find at least one chapter that I've rewritten, chapter 3, I had to turn upside down. And there's new material in all of the chapters that I hope you'll find enriches the story. But more importantly are the introduction and the epilogue, which are entirely new, and in which I have reflected on HRI's findings and attempted to discern what worked well, what might not have worked well in the HRI process, and how this process is scalable to other institutions like ours, predominantly white institutions of long duration, particularly in the South, and the pains and the joys that it takes to uncover this sort of history. I want to read a selection from the epilogue, but before I do that, I want to make some acknowledgments and thank some folks who are in this room and some folks who are not in this room. The first person I want to call out is, I don't think she's here. Is Nadine here? Oh, okay. Nadine is the editor at UVA Press who found some promise in this work and helped shepherd this first-time author through the process. And if she was here, she would appreciate this, but I'll note that a couple times in the process, she had to completely rewrite something that I was supposed to write for the press board because I didn't get it right. And so thank you, Nadine, wherever you are. And everyone else from the press, including Mary Kate Mako, who's back at the desk. The second are the clergy and staff from this church from 2015 into the present time. Of course, this got kicked off when Wallace Adams Riley made his call in 2015 for this study, and so I don't think he could have imagined that it resulted in this, but I'm glad that he did it, and I hope that he enjoys the book when he gets his copy as well. So just to point him out for starters, but other people as well. Lynn Williams, thank you for being a friend and supporting me and letting me, what's the way of saying moan and groan in a non-profane manner? Yeah, kvetch. Thank you, Lynn. Let's see. I'm getting these out of order because I want to do this right. There's Rich and Alicia and Yulia and Mike Dabney. Hey, Mike. And Jason Cherry and all those people for those 6 months that I was actually working here. Really made it a friendly place to be, and I appreciate that very much. Of course, Kelly and Sarah. Raise your hands for those who, for the newcomers here. Thanks for everything, not the least of which is putting this event together. I know it wasn't easy. It was a lot more work than I thought it was going to be, and y'all did all of it. I didn't do anything. So, thank you. And then, of course, Gwen. Where are you, Gwen? Right, Gwen. And Molly, of course, is not here, but Molly was with us through a lot of this process. And then, of course, Melanie. Hey, Melanie. Do you remember at least one time that I remember of us going down to Sefton very early in the process and just absolutely nerding out over all this and kind of the potential that this has, you know, from a variety of different perspectives. And so that was
Save
so
it
much.
for the interview. You're stealing my thunder.
Okay. Oh yeah? Top this. The next group is the HRI Steering Committee, and I didn't take a census. Oh, hey, Rainey, I'm sorry. I didn't see you, so I didn't call you out. Hey, Rainey. Rainey also, clergy that has been extremely supportive of this. My apologies. HRI Steering Committee, who's here? Stand up. Come on. Up, up. Right. Matt, Michelle, Lynn, Beth, I know who we're missing, but Rob Corcoran, Ben Campbell, who am I leaving out? Right, Lynn. Well, I was going to save that one for last. Right, Linda Armstrong. I really wish she was here to be a part of this for a variety of reasons. I'm sorry? Oh, Barbara. Where are you? Why? Oh, you're hiding. That's why I can't. Barbara Holly, of course. Yes, Barbara. And several others of you, I believe, served on various of the subcommittees. So please, thank you. Please and thank you. And I just want to also call out, I wish Fletcher was here to see this as well. He was a big part of this journey as well. Not only in the way he challenged me, but in the way I saw him, someone who was way ahead of everyone 50 years ago, still be able to make changes in his life, and I wish he was around for that. So the fourth group that I want to kind of call out is all of you, all the members of this church. That is, those of you who are not members of the church, sit down. No. Many of you encouraged me. Many of you were delightfully patient with me as I droned on and on about our findings. Michelle, thank you so much. I learned so much about how I present myself from the way you responded to how I was presenting myself. Many of you challenged me and challenged all of us in a lot of this. And of course, Linda, not the least of that group, It's challenging in many ways. I think we can have a good laugh about that, but others as well. So I saw Adrian over there. Adrian, thank you for everything. And I appreciate that the most because it kept me conscious of what is important about this work and, even more importantly, where it needs to take us. Because as I mentioned when we switched over, this is just the start. And it certainly is an odd thing to have a book in an academic format that was created not because of some scholar's pressing need to make a historiographical intervention in some topic, but rather to answer questions that are important to a group of non-historians. And that sounds judgmental. It's not meant to be judgmental. And so I'm really proud of this work, and I consider that we all did it together. And so now thanking everyone should be the last thing, but it's not, of course. As you'll see in the acknowledgments, and many of you have witnessed this firsthand, but every single historical fact and every single sentence in this book bears the imprint of Beth O'Leary and Ann Hayes. And so, this literally would not exist without them. And I know they will resist this, but if we're doing book signings tonight, at least get them to put an initial in the corner of the title page or something, because it's just as much theirs as it is mine. Okay, so this is where I want to do a little bit of a reading here, but it requires just a little bit of background. This is from the epilogue, and I think it homes in on why this is important, not only to St. Paul's, but to our culture more broadly. And in this passage are references to things that show up in different parts of the book, and some things that don't have anything to do with St. Paul's at all, but are important in the larger sense. And it's a passage that's in response to a question about a kind of rhetorical question that I asked based on real questions that I've encountered in the process of this, is that why does this need to take so long? Why does it take 4 years when we know this was wrong and we should do something about it? And the answer, I believe, is that it gives us a clearer and more authentic view of what this place's historical obligation is to the past, the present, and the future. And there's many things that we can point to. The fact of slaveholding is bad enough as it is. But what's unique about St. Paul's experience? So, if I may. St. Paul's is a storytelling church. More than most Southern white churches, it has made a significant contribution to the history, literature, and public conversations about white supremacist beliefs through the stories it has told about itself and about race in the former Confederacy. Of all the things to which St. Paul's has an obligation, perhaps none is more unique and authentic than to redeploy the power of its historical imagination. By that historical imagination, I mean a framework for moral rectitude and possibility in the present day that is derived from the boundaries established by historical example. We have always done this. The presence of Lee and Davis at regular worship at St. Paul's affirmed for its members their sense of self-importance in their own time and enabled them to sit comfortably in the halls of political and economic power while elevating these two figures to quasi-divine status, alongside Jesus, the prophets, and the apostles. The historical fact of Davis receiving the fateful message from Lee while sitting in a St. Paul's pew gave its members a claim to the central national drama of American history well into the 20th century. It also enabled them to advance their profile in the prestigious memorial landscape of Civil War tourism alongside Monument Avenue and Richmond's battlefields. In looking to Lee kneeling next to a black man, They learned to approach challenges to white supremacy with restraint and character instead of with violence and hateful rhetoric. The story about Robert DeMille's funeral in 1925, dripping with language drawn from the justification of slavery, affirmed for them the righteousness of paternalistic white oversight of a permanent black underclass and others' advocacy for more segregation laws. And the later reimagined Lee Communion story, you have to follow that through the book because that story gets turned upside down over time. And the later reimagined communion story offered them by proxy that from the same communion rail, they too were going forward to fulfill a new sacred obligation to be welcoming to black people in St. Paul's. That last one is not, I wouldn't regard that as particularly dangerous. I think that's a good use of bad history. But that dangerous historical imagination is alive today in America. While few people seriously think of slavery as a positive good, an alarming number offer comments on the internet, in public forums, and in print media that fundamentally misconstrue pro-slavery Christianity and the self-styled benevolence of white people before and after emancipation. The Sunday school taught to black people by Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson in Lexington, Virginia, before the Civil War, for instance, is frequently held up as a subversive pseudo-abolitionist venture. It was not. Robert E. Lee's overly parsed declaration that's, quote, "In this enlightened age, there are few, I believe, but that will acknowledge that slavery as an institution is a moral and political evil in any country," unquote, is another such instance. Both assertions, unmoored from context, promote terrible historical misunderstanding of people who accepted slavery as God's design and strove to make slavery work in what they regarded as a more humane fashion, not to end it. The misunderstanding serves to distract the Confederate cause from slavery, yet it is about more than the reputation of the Confederate States. This faulty historical imagination at work in these assertions serves a slightly different purpose today. Adherents to these beliefs firmly maintain that race relationships in the past were harmonious, and therefore that charges of systemic inequality rooted in the legacy of slavery and segregation must be intentionally bogus. Such arguments often conclude with the specious assertion that attempts to address racism are really attempts to sow racial division that had otherwise never existed. It remains a remarkably resilient and potent idea. Twice during the Black Lives Matter uprising of the early summer of 2020, letters to the Richmond Times-Dispatch attempted to defend the Robert E. Lee Memorial on Monument Avenue by citing the Lee Communion story. In one letter, Mr. Scott Fields of Haymarket, Virginia, recalled the story and noted that, quote, "Only Lee could have set the example that we should all try to follow today." And so he concluded that, quote, "The Lee Monument should be replaced with a monument of Lee kneeling beside a former slave." A full-page advertisement from an anonymous group calling themselves the Friends of Lee statue argued a whole raft of inaccurate and misleading assertions about Lee, including the claim that, quote, "he knelt to take communion with a black man when no one else would." So it should be the obligation of St. Paul's, amongst other things, to actively work against these narratives that, defying reasons, continue to have power today. All right, a couple of things about that passage. First is that if I would love to lay out my whole history happy hour on the Lee Communion story and explain to you why it never happened. But that's different. The second thing is that I wrote that 2 years ago, in which claims about the ideas that, for someone who wasn't paying very much attention, claims about the idea that drawing attention to this nation's racial history was intentionally a new innovation and divisive in our civic life. It seemed to be a fringe thing that you'd find on the internet. if not more broadly in other marginalized circles. But you know the way of the world today, right? That, yeah, it's the state of Florida. Our own governor is attempting it. And it's basically the platform of an entire political party. And I don't mean to make light of this, but we historians love it when our stuff's relevant. But I really wish this was not as relevant as that. It just it's remarkable the change that's happened in the last couple of years. A final thing. I'm affirming to Michelle that we're about to wrap it up. You'll notice a title change from the first edition that many of you have seen before, and I want to say a few things about that. The press marketing department, and I've made my peace with this, Mary Kate, so don't worry about it. The press marketing department told me that blind spots was too vague, it was not catchy, and they wanted something else that would sell better. And I didn't like that because blind spots is the theme of this book, although you can't explain that on the cover of a book. Blind spots is the theme of this book, and it's drawn from a Russell Bowie quote. And we love Russell Bowie in this room, don't we? Yes, yes. So I came up with a couple of different options and began testing them with some of my learned friends, a few of which are in this room right now. And I was never too happy with this particular title because, damn it, this isn't just about the lost cause. It doesn't suggest the great spans of time that this book covers and the great transformations that this congregation has undergone, especially in the last generations. And I don't want anyone thinking that this church, as it is now, is or has been in recent memory devoted to the lost cause, because that's not the case, and I'll be the first to say so. But when I tested the title on folks, they tended to gravitate to this one. Including one person, Brian Palmer, for those of you who know Brian Palmer, said, "Oh yeah, no, I would buy that book." And all of a sudden something clicked in my brain. I'm like, oh, that's right, we got to sell these things. So I am all in on the title. The subtitle is a little more serious. First, the subtitle is Confessions of a Southern Church. And I felt a little weird announcing a confession on behalf of everyone in this room. It's not really, I mean, we're kind of too late for that, but it's not really my place to do that. That's how you all are thinking about this and feeling it and approaching it. But then I felt better about it when I realized that this isn't the end of our process. It is only the beginning. And in the larger work of reckoning with past harms, and hopefully, Melanie, we can talk about this when we all come up, about the becoming beloved community process and the way the Episcopal Church kind of defines this. In the larger work of reckoning with past harms, the first step is truth-telling and confession. And so I was fine. This is the first step. This is just simply the confession. Only once that happens can we move forward with atonement, remediation, repentance, and actions in pursuit of justice. Now, I don't want to say that this is the starting point of this church's pursuit of justice because, like everything else, y'all have been doing that for way longer than I've been here. So, but I like to think that this could add something new to that endeavor. And so that's what I'd like to encourage y'all to think about. We can think, well, this book, this evening, we can do signings and whatnot, put it on the coffee tables or the library bookshelves and be proud of ourselves for having accomplished this. And that's nice. I'm going to feel good tonight. But I hope instead that we do more than that this serves as a good foundation for future work, whether it's political activism or prayer, new platforms for storytelling, or reparations. Hopefully all of those things taken together. So as you read this, or reread it, as the case may be, I hope that you aren't just fascinated or maybe horrified by the history, but also that you are motivated to do something about it. And in the upcoming weeks, we'll have opportunities, again, to talk through what that is. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chris. All right. So just to give you guys a sense of what's going to happen tonight, we're going to conclude just before 7, but we're going to chat a little bit more and unpack kind of what's in their head and what's in the book, and kind of hopefully have a chance to come out to you for you to ask some questions. And then around 7, we're going to open it up. We're going to have a reception. There's going to be an opportunity for tours, book signing, and more conversation. So that's the general format of the night. All right, welcome, Melanie. Hey, how you doing?
Hey, glad to be here.
All right, so I'm going to hang on to this microphone, but you guys are going to have to share that one. So we're going to have to work on that. So that's just the thing. All right, so Melanie, there may be some people here who don't know who you are. Can you give us a little backstory on why you're sitting here tonight?
I am Reverend Melanie Mullen. I consider myself the chief St. Paul's alum. So after serving here, my first call out of seminary was called by presiding Bishop Michael Curry to lead a brand new department, new experimental program called the Office of Reconciliation, Justice, and Creation Care, which embodies the Episcopal Church's denomination-wide work on race, environment, and all the intersectional things therein.
Whoa,
Yeah.
that's heavy. So what's a day look like for you?
A day looked like for me a lot of Zoom. We were doing Zoom before it was cool, but also helping the church tell the stories of what it's already doing. Episcopalians have really good instincts. People all over the country and all over the world, Episcopalians are not just in the U.S., are moving on issues that are important to them. But I think the magic is that there are some folks who have caught hold of what our call is,
Right.
what our justice call is, what our history, what's the thing that only this church can do. And so that's why I continually bring back what I learned from St. Paul's and why it impressed people across the Episcopal Church from Bishop Curry on down. This work is something that we are teaching the church through all the tools that are new, sacred ground and creation care curricula. These are all things that we've learned about how we talk about what it means to do the work of people of God.
Yeah. And you mentioned like unique to the Episcopal Church, which I think we have our own jam, we have our own lane. And I think every church has that also. And it's kind of finding that, identifying that, and staying in that lane. And that's why I think that, Chris, what you've been talking about is something that we are uniquely called to do and called to be, and a way that we can speak into this differently. So Melanie, we throw the word around now, beloved community. Say a little bit more about that.
So it's no coincidence Chris brought up 2015 as this year. There was this movement across the country. Remember that big summer? There was also General Convention, in which the Episcopal Church made some rules that I remember Wallace quoted in that famous sermon, the Episcopal Church has voted that we are not going to be a church that allows places that carry out history undiagnosed, that are not going to have Confederate flags in our prayer area spaces, but we're also going to ask questions. And it put into our version of Episcopal law all the ways in which the church will spend money. And we've pledged about $1 million of our church money on helping us learn about how we approach history. And Beloved Community was coming out of the Episcopal Brain Trust as far as how do we enter in that work. And so there's an image of a labyrinth. Hopefully y'all seen it before, that implies that Episcopalians don't like to be told what to do. But we acknowledge where people are, and there's a lot of ways into racial justice and racial history. And so it could be starting with telling the truth about history. It could be the justice work of repairing the breach. It could be the healing and liturgy work. And all of those are a part of how we understand our calling as people of God, to live into that phrase that Martin Luther King said, becoming a beloved community. But we take it seriously, and we do it day in and day out. And at this point, it's been 6 years of this. So it's a continual commitment. It's not going anywhere, and it just expands how we understand how we change the world.
Yeah, cool. And then truth-telling. Y'all know my relationship with meditation, and one of the practices of meditation, or one of the teachings of the way to think about it, is when you click off autopilot. like, what does it look like to be on autopilot? I mean, I go through the whole day, and sometimes I look back, I'm like, what happened, right? And I think the church can be on autopilot too, right? And we have been for decades and centuries. So I feel like this notion of truth-telling is like turning off. Like, we don't get to be on autopilot anymore.
That'll preach.
I think that's what your book is doing. So, okay, thank you. Chris, maybe how did this all start? Were you like a staunch Episcopalian and like super religious and like, I have a quest? How did you get connected to this project?
How did I get connected to this project? So I only recently, I think about 2 years before we moved here to Richmond, I was accepted into the Episcopal Church. Of course, accepted because I got the lateral move from being grown up a Catholic.
Hold the microphone close.
I got the lateral move from being grown up Catholic. And so I was enjoying the Episcopal Church in Hendersonville, North Carolina. And the news, I'm not gonna, I don't know if I want to get too, Beth, can I get too, okay. The news hit the wires that St. Paul's up in Richmond was doing a reconsideration of its memorials that it had in the sanctuary. And there were one or two historians that I admire and have nothing against, but I thought took the wrong angle on that. And so I'm not going to mention names, but Emmanuel, I'll tell you later. And so I wrote something on my personal blog at the time, and Kevin Levin, who actually Square in the Circle, I talked to him this morning for an interview for this, posted that on his blog, at which point Beth, who you never know it, but Beth crawls the internet and looks for stuff. Not much is going to get by her. And Beth noticed that and kind of reached out to me in a personal way and says, like, thank you for sticking up for St. Paul's. This is all nuts. This is blah, blah, blah. And so we had a kind of a back and forth. And then I got this job, not intending at the time to get it. And I got this job and moved to Richmond. And I said, hey, Beth, guess what? I'm moving to Richmond. She's like, oh, you have to come here and be involved in this. And so, you know, I would be inclined to be involved in any church that is doing a historical self-study, just being a historian and all. But especially one that was so critical as this one that I actually arrived here about, 8-10 months after it got underway. And as soon as I walked through the door, Linda Armstrong was like, okay, you're in charge now. I'm like, what? I don't even know anyone here of the history research project. So.
Whoa. All right, cool. Thank you. Speaking of Linda, I want to talk about relationships. I want to hear, you mentioned nerding out in Sefton's. I want to hear a little bit more about that story. Melanie, maybe you could talk about when you met Chris for the first time. And I know writing the foreword of a book is a big deal. So, Melanie, tell us about kind of the relationships that have been built through this and maybe meeting Chris for the first time.
I thought Chris was always here. Like we all are. But I do remember the folks like Linda like Beth, who had been pulling on the threads of this uncomfortable work. And I don't think my first memory of starting the process was not a happy moment. There was stress. There were people crying. There was some shouting. But the relationships that St. Paul's creates carried the whole community through. I mean, there's the fact that there are the groups that have dinners, the meals after church that carried over because it was a long, slow period of work. But one of my favorite pictures is of Chris, who I guess was voluntold, was going to start teaching a class about HRI. And he's upstairs with the big screen going on with a PowerPoint showing folks how do you look at historical documents. And everybody looks very uncomfortable. Remember this class started with, well, this is how you turn the power on. So we got but then we're still friends, and we're going to go on this long journey together. And I think there's lots of churches that attempt to do these kinds of works, but without the friendship base, it's not as meaty, it's not as real. So St. Paul's has that. And I hope that you felt like you were brought into the community of potlucks and other potlucks, drinks and dinners as well.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of go ahead.
So I got to put this out there in terms of relationships, and speaking of Linda in particular, and I hope she appreciates this.
We're talking about Linda Armstrong.
Linda Armstrong.
Say if you're new here tonight, who is she?
Sorry, Linda was the chairperson of the History and Reconciliation Initiative, and she was a bulldog and a fighter and impatient, and I had to go back on Prozac because of her.
Okay. Enough said.
But what I will say is that with Linda and with several others of you in this audience, in this audience, is I learned so much about how to be at odds with someone and still remain in community with them, and that's an experience I've had at St. Paul's that I've never had anywhere else with the people who are here.
God, isn't that's just the truth of so much. Melanie, what do you encounter out there? I mean, I started off with like woo woo celebration, and I know it's weird. I mean, this isn't really something to be celebrated. Chris, we're joining with you because this is such an accomplishment. But I want to talk about pushback.
Yeah.
Melanie, have you seen any?
I'm remembering even when this hit the newspaper and Beth scrolling the blogs of the flaggers and angry folks, and we could see on Facebook people who weren't part of the community going, what are they doing? And we're going to circle at night, and we're going to put our anxiety and our anger out on this community. And for a while, we had a security guard. Remember that? There was a security guard out front. What would happen if we started asking these questions? And some of those early questions and conversations, people said, I'm for this, but I'm worried about what other people will think. People were sending emails. We got so much email. We got hate. There was a petition. There was a GoFundMe to get rid of the clergy. Not from anyone here. People in Alabama wanted to get rid of us. So how do you be a community in the face of the idea that the whole world might be looking at you and thinking something scary and strange? But once again, it was that community. It was folks getting forward and folks like everyone here and Linda, who not only said, I'm not 100% sure about this. Remember Linda saying, my ancestors were the overseers for Thomas Jefferson's family. Where do I fit in this? But also, then she came around and said, I have a crush on all historians, so I want to go wherever they're going. Yeah.
Melanie, what do you say to people when they get scared?
I have to say, truly, I have seen the face of God here. And I know we all know the prayers, we sing the songs, we know God's with us, but there have been times, even in very stressful moments, I remember a few vestry meetings where I was completely convinced that as this community talked about HRI work, the Holy Spirit was present in a truly and profound way. And I know that as much as we have our ethics and we have each other, God reinforces again and again the work that was going on in St. Paul. So I hope other people felt that as well, too. Yeah.
Chris, what about you? I mean, what did you learn as you and Beth and Ann and so many people were looking through the histories of people you knew were going to say, we did the best we could? You know, what did you learn?
That wasn't on the cheat sheet.
Well, just read something off there.
I learned so much, and it's everything from, I'm a 19th century historian, most of this book is 20th century, and so I learned about the 20th century, but that's not what we're talking about. Yeah. And as previously mentioned, I learned how resilient this community is and how we could have arguments amongst ourselves and still turn around and end the conversation with, I love you, I can't wait to see you next time. Yeah. And so, and I learned I was reminded yesterday because I was talking with someone who was present at the first facilitated conversation, and talked about how heated it was, and many of you were probably here, and I learned, the weird thing is like no one ever griped at me about any of this. You got it, Beth got it, Linda got it, but no one ever griped to me except for one person who's in here. And that's fine. And so it was weird. I didn't get the pushback that all of y'all got, and certainly, there's a anthropological study on the obvious reasons why that might be the case. But no, but getting back to the point is that, and this is part of what's in the epilogue about the value of being slow on this rather than doing something quickly, rushing to make a statement and doing something, is that it gives you an opportunity to understand that this work is not intended to be prosecutorial or shaming or iconoclastic in any particular way, even though we did do a little bit of iconoclasm.
You're going to have to tell me what that means, but not now.
Beth could probably describe it better. It's tearing down sacred symbols.
Gotcha.
And so just learning kind of the absolute value of being able to sit with something over time, and letting as you let the grace flow through your work, that it'll spread to other people who might not be so certain that this is the direction we want to go in.
Yeah. Melanie, I wonder about that idea of tempo and pace as a woman of color. Yeah. How would you respond to how fast we should go and the care and all that?
As a meditator, I think you would appreciate this process went at times what felt like an excruciating level of slowness, but it had to be done. I remember bringing in an outside facilitator, Don Edwards, who said, our first conversations, do y'all remember, it only had 2 questions. What did you notice? And when did you learn this? So unveiling yourself, all of ourselves and our stories as a part of the story, was, I think, the thing that made this take a long time, but made the roots really deep. Yeah. And I have to say, I love the revision to this book, from the parish report to this book, because, Chris, you seem to have stumbled on the question without even being asked. Like, who are you in your story, and what did you notice in this history? That's what makes the difference. But I think telling our own story, this is our story.
Yeah.
Whether you're new or old. Yeah.
And I'm going to bring it home, because on page 7, the leading question is the study begins with a question, and this is in past tense, but I think we can very much put it in present tense, because back to your point, it's still our work, and we're kind of back at the beginning again. And the question is, how do the people of St. Paul's understand race and racial relations from a Christian perspective? How do they act upon these beliefs in their church and in their public lives in Richmond? Still what we're about, don't you think? All right. Anything else y'all want to say tonight?
I got to call out one person by way of a story in here. Is the part of the press work to publicize this? I did an author's corner thing with them, and it said, "What was your favorite story from this book?" And I was like, "Well, this isn't really a book full of stories that I'm really excited about." And I could say that, well, that time in 1922 when Andrew Christian knocked a Klansman down on the portico, and when he tried to get back up, he knocked him down again. And that was, I was like, that's neat. But then you realize that, well, they just didn't want the Klan be involved in the way that they were trying to make segregation work right. So it's like, okay, half a cheer for Andrew Christian. All right, that's cool. And so there's like not one big story, but one thing that really stuck out to me over the long period are the little changes that were made over time and will continue to change over time. And I hope this book is part of that in this community going forward. But one, like the best piece of primary source evidence to talk about how different generations understood Robert E. Lee and the effect of the lost cause and understanding Civil War history and memory in this church was composed, I can't remember the exact date, but Anne Freeman wrote your memory of that moment in 1946 when a Navy serviceman broke one of the stained glass windows and got blood everywhere. And you reflected on what that meant to you about war and what that meant to you about when you think about Robert E. Lee and how you grew up thinking about him, but how just the experience of your lifetime gave you a different perspective on him and saw him in a different way. And every generation goes through that. And that was just the best piece of writing and reflection on how things change that I've read that's involved in this book. And so I really thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Anne Freeman.
Yeah. Any comments, Melanie? Anything else?
I was just going to say this work is so important that the church cannot let it go. The church has to do it because we have a responsibility not just to the history, but to the care of every soul that encounters it. And as folks used to walk by and think, is this a museum? Who is there and why are you there? We can say more than just, oh, we're the good people here. But the fact that we have an understanding of Jesus, we have an understanding of our spirituality that holds history in its totalness. And I'll tell you, the saddest email I ever saw was as we were processing this with the community conversation, someone asked the clergy, now if we start talking about history, and I know my beloved grandparent was a racist or a bad person, what does that say about me? And are they in hell? I mean, these are questions that the church has to answer. Yeah. But I think that I hope we can come to a place where we understand now that history is big and broad and complex, and God loves everyone in it, and that we will go forward and not only living our best spiritual lives for ourselves, but doing some redemption and some healing work for all those who went back and before us in the past.
Right on. Yep. All right, y'all. Well, thank you for being, Melanie, thank you for coming all this way and being with us. And Chris, just thank you. Other opportunities to move, the books are going to be available. There are ways that you can purchase the books for the discounted rate, and you can find that information, I think, on your table. Is that right, Kelly? Or go back and talk to Mary Kate at the end. There's also opportunities we're going to re-engage. You may have engaged with Blind Spots when it first came out. Remember, 2 years ago during the pandemic? We're going to re-engage with this new iteration, and there are opportunities for us to do that. So here is information about that. Right now, I invite you to hang out. There is a reception in the atrium that is going to be delicious, and you're invited to go to that. We're also, our history tour, Parish Life, our history tour folks are going to be available in the church to take you through the stations of St. Paul's. Is that right, Beth? So that is going to be available also through the stations of St. Paul's, another aspect of this storytelling and truth-telling. Have a beautiful night. See you later. See you in church.